Shashi man butchered it a few times.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
That sounds Shashi-like.
yeah, it does.
Let's see. I'm making sure that it is on the YouTube channel. Uh, we should we should theoretically see it. Oh, interesting. So we don't see the non-video members on the YouTube live stream, which is great. Uh, we should theoretically see the YouTube comments if there are any come in here. I'll be monitoring the YouTube channel as well, and I'll pause if we need to in order to answer something. But outside of that, we are now live. We are on YouTube, and so I'll kind of give a quick intro. Y'all, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We are doing a JS drop. If you've been at a JS drop in the past before, you know these are very technically heavy sessions where we're kind of making sure that we kind of help people upskill in some way, shape, or form. We have the this dot team here in the background, so that way people can kind of see what's going on and be part of this as well. They may have questions that we may be asking at that same time. But we are joined today with Ryan Furrer. We've met Ryan at several conferences and events, and he is so knowledgeable on the Astro tooling that we thought it'd be really great if he were to come through and kind of share some of that knowledge with us, and we can share it with the community as well. And so, without further ado, the floor is yours, Ryan. If you need any help at any time, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be hanging out in the background to kind of show you support on the side.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Danny. Welcome everyone from this dot and welcome everyone on YouTube. I appreciate you being here today. Tracy she didn't give me an opportunity. She just told me what I was going to be doing when I was able to meet her at the Commit Your Code conference, and that's how this happened. And this talk happened because I was wearing this hat. So it all worked out really, really well. I'm going to share my screen. You should be able to see everything now. Let's see if I can hide this. Can go over there. Cool. So I just want to talk about Astro today. It's one of those things that I really latched onto as a developer. So a little bit of history about me. I was a musician in a former career, and then I moved to supply chain, and then I moved into web development. Front end engineering is my go-to thing. And for a while, I really struggled with React. And I know this is not a unique story. And it wasn't until I stumbled upon Astro that the framework ideology really started to make sense. And so this sort of like created this deep adoration of Astro and what the team's doing and everything like that. Anyone who knows me or has watched my streams or whatever knows that I talk about Astro a lot just because I really do enjoy it. I enjoy working with it, and I just want to spread the wealth. So Astro is a fantastic development. It'll streamline your workflow, as I say here in the slideshow. And again, let's just talk a little bit more about me. I'm Ryan Furrer. I'm a front engineer located in Islip, New York. On Long Island, I'm about an hour to an hour and a half outside of New York City. And a fun fact for me is I'm extremely nerdy about music theory, among a bunch of other things I'm nerdy about, but music theory I can really dive deep on. So yeah, let's talk about why I'm here. As we saw before, I'm here to talk about Astro. It's a JavaScript web framework optimized for building fast, content-driven websites. And they really, really emphasize that with great DX and shipping as little client-side JavaScript as possible. So it's not unique to Astro, but they do use a lot of server-side rendering, and it's really, really powerful for that. So can I get a show of hands, at least in the Zoom call, how many people have heard of Astro before? I'm sure most of you. Okay, great. And then of those of you that have heard of Astro, how many of you have used it in a personal site? Okay, a few. And how many of you at this dot or elsewhere have proposed or used Astro for a client project? Rob, I'd like to see it. Mark, very good. Okay, excellent. I ask these questions because I see that I think a lot of people are maybe afraid to use Astro. They reach for the things that they're familiar with, whether it's Next, straight up React, Vue, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with those frameworks. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. But why Astro? I just think it's neat, honestly. And I do prefer to ask why not Astro because it's really, really powerful. It's not for absolutely everything, but it is very, very powerful for us out there. And it's also got a cute little mascot called Houston. I mean, how could you deny Houston over there? And they do have an IDE theme named Houston, which just has a lot of syntax support for it. But all that you need for the syntax support in your editor is the Astro extension. We'll talk more about that later as well. All right. Let's talk about the key features of Astro. Like I mentioned before, server-side rendering, it renders all the pages and components as static HTML. It definitely helps improve initial load time. This goes on to talk about server islands. Server islands basically let you take another front-end framework, whether or library in React's case, but we can use React, Vue, Svelte, and a few others, and use those to increase or create interactivity in your website or app. So the server islands, though, they load in as static HTML, and then you can choose when you want to load in that extra chunk of information, that React or that Vue or that Svelte, to make it interactive. So again, just going into that here, there's a client and you choose when to load in that JavaScript. And you'll see this in the code that we discussed later, but you could choose when it's visible. You could choose on page load, so it loads it right away. And by default, and the whole design of Astro is that it ships as little client-side JavaScript as possible. And that's what helps make it part of what makes it so fast. Lastly, and this is something I've raved about, and I know Chris Nowicki of this that has seen a lot of this as he's been working with Astro recently, but the DX, the developer experience with Astro, I think is near unparalleled. It's got a CLI, amazing documentation, and then, like I mentioned, the Astro extension, which increases the support in your IDE. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's so good actually that they made their CLI into like an API that others can then use to build great CLIs. It's phenomenal. It's called clack.cc. If you go there, you can view more about it. I think it's killer. And it was something that, your first experience with creating an Astro site, it's fantastic. I gotta say. It'll definitely not, blow you away. Okay, content collections. This is something that, in my mind, sets Astro apart. And recently in Astro 5.0, we have the content layer API. So content collections let you define a collection from a set of similar data to use elsewhere in the project. So with 5.0, we've got the content layer API. And basically, this lets us pull in data from multiple different sources to then put on our project. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. With that, we also get with TypeScript and Zod, we get these really powerful schemas that let us define exactly what it should be, what the data should be, where it's coming from, and we can match it up with, uh, let's say we're pulling it from CMS, we could match that data and schema up with what we're expecting on our Astro, and it works, and it is like magic. Like there's a lot of magic under the hood with Astro, I feel like. And I've heard that from others. Actually, when I went to a storybook meetup, I should say, in New York City, unfortunately, Storybook does not work with Astro. And when I asked why, they said, well, we've gotten with the Astro team quite a lot. We've tried, and they're just doing so much work under the hood that it really makes it difficult to sort of peel back those layers. So if you do require Storybook, as of right now, to my knowledge, there's not a workaround for it. But just something to keep in mind. But you get those configs, and I'll show it in the code later on. It's really powerful to be able to get that information. And TypeScript, I know, has had a huge rise in popularity recently, and I don't see why not to use it, honestly. And then simplified development, the content collections offer all the tools you need to query, filter, and generate routes from your content. So again, you can do this with other frameworks, but having it built into Astro, I think, is what helps make it so powerful. Okay, this is a screenshot of the content layer API straight from Astro. So on the left here, you can see the data sources that are being fed into the loaders, whether it's coming from a CMS, a different API, or your own Markdown, MDX, or JSON files. So these get put into loaders, which Astro comes with, or you can build your own. Then it goes into your data store, and then you decide where to put these. So you might say, okay, I want to store my blogs as an MD file in my GitHub repo. This is in your content collection. You just load it and then choose where to display it. And here, you've all probably seen this as well. This is what lets you get a unique slug per page that you're loading from the data store. Or let's say you have something else from a CMS, you could load it in that way. And for example, using an API, let's say you have a newsletter and you have an API to access those newsletter posts that you're writing or your YouTube feed. You can use the content layer API to feed it all into one place. And I think this is really powerful for developers that are also content creators to have their home on the internet be their actual home on the internet and be able to control what it looks like as well. You don't have to necessarily embed YouTube videos. You can make it all look the same. And this is just an example of that. So I started designing my new portfolio and what I want to use. And so, for example, you have these newsletters here. These are coming in from Beehive, and then my blogs, which are coming in from a CMS. Currently, I'm using Storyblock CMS. I don't know what I'm going to use in the future for my next version, but for version 5, this is coming in from the API, like I said, from Beehive. This is coming in from a CMS, and you could have a YouTube video be part of that too. It doesn't matter. It's really, really powerful. It's honestly something that really blew me away when they introduced it with Astro 5.0. Okay, Astro versus other popular frameworks. I think, like I said in my intro, I do think Astro is a really good place for people transitioning into the React or Vue world. I think going from HTML, CSS, JavaScript into Astro makes a lot of sense for people, and I think that because it's like I said, the developer experience is fantastic, but it's also just it was easier to understand for me. And I actually wrote about this. This might be a little bit of a hot take, but hey, I'm I'm the one here talking about Astro, and I genuinely think people should learn Astro. It's more familiar to HTML as well, and it just makes a lot of sense. My brother, who has delved into multiple different tech roles or technologies, learn them. He also saw Astro and was like, "Wow, this makes a lot more sense than jumping into React." So again, to focus on performance and simplicity, it is ideal for static websites that have some dynamic properties. React, Next, Vue, and Angular, very, very powerful, not shaming them whatsoever because they're all great. However, I think that something especially like Next offers so much out of the box that a lot of us don't use in our projects. And this is where Astro comes in, I think. You have a more simple framework that just gets you what you need without the overly complex things. You can run into issues like caching issues with the Next, I know aren't a problem. And it's just something that you kind of do away with that. All right, these are some more use cases for Astro. So talking to you, solo devs, you consulting devs, anyone who's got clients, you could realistically use Astro for anything and everything. It's that powerful. Again, I did say that, maybe it's less powerful for full-blown dynamic applications, but guess what? If that application is mainly static and it's got some dynamic parts of it, you could use server islands for that. So blogs and portfolios, it's really, really great for obviously content heavy, text content heavy sites. It's phenomenal for obviously throwing a marketing website, building those interactive landing pages and capture forms. Again, you could just throw in a server island with React or whatever framework if you're choosing and use those forms. E-commerce stores, actually Astro, somewhat recently announced their e-commerce focus, and we'll check that out in a second, and web applications. Again, you can use it for more complex projects. I'm not saying you can't. People much smarter than me can prove me wrong, but I think that Astro it's got a use case for everything. So let's take a look at a few samples. So this is Astro's own blog. And if I come over here, hopefully you can see this. I'm using Wappalizer to identify what technologies are being used. It's an extension that's available for Chrome, Firefox, and probably Safari. But you can see that it's using Astro. There's no React, there's no Vue, there's nothing. It's just Astro. And this is their blog. For another example, we can visit my own site, shameless plug. But this is using just Astro. There's no React or anything built in. And it's really powerful. So these are coming in from my Storyblock CMS. Really, really powerful. The e-commerce store, like I mentioned, Astro is leaning into e-commerce. And again, their very own store is powered by Astro. Uh, what I wanted to show you, though, is we can come down here and check out Houston once again, this cute little mascot. And I'm going to open up the developer tools because obviously on a store, we're going to have interactivity, right? Mainly static information. This is probably going to be fed in from a database, the pricing, and then you've got to obviously increase or decrease your quantity here. So if we inspect, and there we go. I'm looking for this Astro Island, and I'll bump this up a little bit for you. This Astro Island, and we can see that it's using solid JS for this, is rendering the component. And that is what allows you to have that interactivity. So it's being rendered as static HTML until the data is, until the interactivity rather is needed. And then they go ahead and hydrate it. And then an interactive landing page again. So what's really neat about Astro, and I want to show you this as well, is they have a bunch of themes and starters to get going with your project. So I actually show you how to get here from home. You go to resources and themes. And then from here, we could filter out a bunch of different categories, whether we want blogs, docs, e-commerce in our case, or landing page. You could choose what technology you want. So by default, they're all obviously going to use Astro, but do you want it to use Alpine JS or Preact or MDX? You have all these options. And of course, there are some paid and free ones, but we can just filter by landing pages here, and Fortify Astro looks good. And you can come in here and see the live demo, which is great. And boom, you've got a whole landing page built with Astro, and you can go ahead, in this case, if you purchase this one, but you can use this as a starter for your own project. I still encourage everyone to dive deep in the docs, learn your way around things. But if you are familiar with Astro and everything, and you just say, "Hey, I want an e-commerce site," you go ahead and use this. You don't need to do it from the ground up. I think it's very valuable for those of you that are new to it, though, especially learning the content collections and all that jazz. Their tutorial is fantastic. Astro offers lots of integrations. So whether it's with the databases, APIs, or analytic tools, Astro really has it all, especially CMSs. It's pretty nutty uh, how well thought out their docs are, especially when it comes to CMSs. But we're on the Astro Docs site, and we're just going to check out the integrations. So here you can see that we have integrations like front-end frameworks. I already discussed this a little bit. We'll check it out in a little bit here as well. But officially, they support Alpine, Preact, React, SolidJS, Svelte, and Vue. They have your SSR adapters. Where do you want to deploy it? Vercel and Netlify, excuse me, are the ones that I've personally used, but of course you have other options. And then they have their very own Astro DB. I don't have access to this yet, but it's something I'm excited to use. But these are all the official ones. And then if we go to third-party services here over on the left, we have a bunch of different guides for different services. Do you want to deploy it on AWS? Do you want to deploy it on Cloudflare? Dino is, they just released their 2.0, I think, and I really want to try it out. CMSs, though, I mean, you just have your choice, really. You can pick from whatever you would like. And like I said, the documentation is fantastic. This is actually how I said, let me try Storyblock about a year and a half ago when I made my current iteration of my portfolio. You can't go wrong with the docs on Astro. And if you do need further help, they have a Discord that is pretty well monitored. I had a problem actually making the demo site that I'll go into in a little bit. And I was able to get help. And of course, it was a stupid, simple solution, right? They really have everything though, so I encourage you to use the docs a lot if you're checking it out. Oh, come on. There we go. And then getting started with Astro is as easy as npm create Astro at latest. You could use pnpm, yarn, whatever. PNPM, the only issue you might have is, for example, their image optimizer, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but PNPM doesn't need a little bit of extra steps. And that's my slide deck. I do have a website and code I want to walk you through. But before I put this down, if you'd like to connect with me, you could go ahead and scan that QR code on screen. It will take you to my Bento site, or you could find me everywhere but LinkedIn at Ryan DOT Furrer. LinkedIn, I'm just Ryan Furrer. So I appreciate that. I'll leave this up for another second here. I'm just going to catch up on the chat with this dot. Yeah, Tom is talking about using Storybook with Astro. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Astro, obviously. Okay, let's dive in. I can close this and that. All right, so first I'm going to just go ahead and get my server running. Then again, normally I use PNPM for my own projects.
Has a, oh
Go
no,
ahead.
I forgot that there's a delay on the stream because I was like, I don't see what you're showing on the stream, so I didn't know if you shared it properly. Got it.
Oh, no, no, no problem. Thank you. I'd rather you check than not. So this site is live. You can go check it out at whynotastro.vercel.app if you'd like. But I just built this as a way to sort of demo a few things and show off the code as well. So again, we're going to talk through Why Not Astro. It's a static site builder that's fast, flexible, and easy to use, and you can use it with your favorite frameworks. So from a business standpoint, I think this is the most valuable part of Astro. Let's say you have a team, and maybe it's not ideal, but let's say you're just have a team, you're getting a project up and running quickly, and you need to go. You don't have time for people to say, let me make sure this works properly with only Vue, or this works properly only with Solid.js. You can use all of them in one project. And that I think is where it's really powerful. You can let your developers code in what they're comfortable and familiar with if you need to get something up and running quickly. Do I think it's the way to go to use every supported framework in a project? No, but you can, and that's the really, really powerful part. Um, so yeah, components. Astro's gotten just like any other modern framework. You can build components in an Astro file, and I'll show you that here. But you can see here the code on the left-hand side. So I made a heading component. It accepts a proper level and size, and there you get the headings right here. So let's go ahead and open that up. Okay. So this might look familiar to some of you. I'm sure a lot of you use these types of components where you have a bunch of options and such, but then using it in the code is as simple as this here on the left. Um, I don't necessarily need to talk through this, but we just have some Astro props that, such as align, class, level, and size. As you can see, all of them are optional besides level, and this is how it defines the HTML tag that gets rendered. Astroprops are a little bit different than you might be used to working with, for example, like with Next. There is a slight syntax difference. Just bear that in mind. Like, definitely look up the Astroprops, which is a whole section on their docs page. And then we could see here, like I have text 4XL equals 4XL. I'm using Tailwind for this. So if the this class equals this prop, basically. And then, of course, the text goes into a slot here. Astro does take a lot of, you can use slots really, really powerfully in Astro. For these examples, I just have a default slot, but you can name a slot and then ensure that only one bit of content goes into that slot if you have multiple on your page. And again, on the website, you have the whole component code here. And this theme here on the website is the Houston uh, syntax highlighting, so you could get a taste for that as well. Okay, buttons. If you have used Shad CN UI, this here should look very familiar. I love Shad CN UI. I think it's really, really powerful. And while you can use it with Astro, guess what? It's going to use everything as a React component. In my mind, that is defeating the purpose of Astro. Use those frameworks when you need the interactivity, not always. So what I did was I have my own button component that's very much influenced by Shad CN UI, and went in here and just edited as need be. But you can see here I have all my variations rendered. And here's the code for that again. It's all on the website. You could scroll through it, obviously. Chris, thank you for sharing the site. Appreciate it. Again, this looks like a lot of gibberish. If you're not used to Tailwind, I'm sorry. It is my definitely preferred way of working with CSS these days. It's not mandatory, of course. You could do this all without it. But this is really how I do prefer working with it. We come down here. There is a default size. There is the default variant, which if we scroll back up is this here. If you have any question on this, I'm happy to talk about it. I've been using ShadCN for the better part of a year now in various different projects, including Gridiron Survivor. And I think where you get the most out of it is customizing it for your own site. Of course, again, this is a very basic styling and everything like that, but you can go wild with it. It's just a blank slate. And then, of course, you can use the framework of your choice. So, fully supported frameworks, like I mentioned before, are React, Vue, Solid.js, Svelte, Preact, and Alpine.js. And really, you just need to install the integration of your choice, and the CLI does the rest. Note, though, there are some extra steps, like I mentioned, when using multiple JSX frameworks like React, Preact, and Solid.js. I'll go into that in a few minutes. But let me go ahead and make the browser bigger here. Went and included I made a simple counter component and then included each framework's version of it here. I'm not an expert on anything, so please don't judge my code for that, whether especially Vue and Svelte. I don't use those regularly, but it works. I can go in here, increase the count, decrease the count in React. I could do the same in Vue, increase, decrease. And like I said, all the code is here. Svelte works as you would expect. Preact works as you would expect. Solid. And of course, I had to fun with the colors, right? And making everything match a little bit. And an Alpine finally. This was actually my first experience with Alpine. It looks like a mix of like HTMX and Vue, I feel like. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Let's go ahead and open up the React component real quick. So, and actually, I'll go ahead and show you the file structure I have while I do. Oops, sorry, guys. So very important when you're using components from different frameworks with Astro is that you sort of isolate them in your project structure. So inside my source folder, I'll go to components. And then in here, you'll notice I have a separate folder for Alpine, Preact, React, and so on. Svelte, Solid, and Vue. This is important because especially when you're using multiple JSX, um, frameworks, you sort of have to config your TypeScript and where to send that information. I'll show you that in a second. Again, you don't have to do this, but it's heavily, heavily recommended. And from my experience, definitely do this. So let's go ahead and open up React and we'll open up the counter really quickly. Again, this is the same code that you're seeing here. But then if I open the counter section, and I'll just make this full screen. So on the left is the React counter. And what's important to note with Astro, you do have to export a named function. Otherwise, you'll get an error. And then here we have my counter section. Notice this is an Astro component. So in here, I've just imported all of the counters, as well as a couple of my link and heading component. And I'm going to come down here. Okay, so this is where we're looking. This is the the container, and this is the actual counter React component. And this is the directive you're giving the browser or the client when to load that JavaScript that's necessary for it. So you can use client visible, you can use, and it will load it when it's within, you can view it on the website. You can use client load, which I've mentioned, which loads it up front right away. I try not to do that unless it's something that is, going to be used right away or in view right away. Because obviously the less upfront JavaScript you're shipping to the client, the faster it's going to be, the better experience it's going to be. So for these, as I'm just scrolling down the page, I didn't find a need to use anything but client visible. And then of course I have a code custom component just for reusability. Astro does come with some of its own components, which is really important to note. It does come with a code one, which will use the theme that you declare in your Astro config, which we'll go over shortly. It comes with an image component similar to Next.js, where it optimizes that image and tries to resize it and such. They're actually also increasing the capabilities of it. One note with the image component, it requires an additional plugin or dependency called Sharp. And if you use PNPM, you have to explicitly install Sharp. That's why I use NPM for this project, just to avoid that. But just so you know, if you use Astro and PNPM, you will have to install Sharp separately. Just a note. So I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this because you already saw the code. And that's the entire container. And I'll pull up the website again as well. So this code
Hey Ryan, maybe
is
make
displaying
your
this here.
font a little bigger for the Zoom or for the YouTube stream.
Sure. You mean in cursor?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so that's the counter section. I'm sorry, folks. And like I said, each one of these has a thing. You can go and check out the code. It should be public on GitHub. I'll go ahead and add a link to the repo on the website if you're interested in seeing it. Again, I don't claim to be an expert in any of these, but you can at least use this as reference. So let's just talk about the structure a little bit more. So we talked about our components and having a different directory for each framework. And obviously we have our basic ones here. We saw our button, right? We have our code custom. And what did I do here? I just imported code from Astro components, and Shiki comes bundled with Astro, which is great. This is how you get your syntax highlighting. You can also use Prism if you prefer. I like Shiki. Why not use it? And then here I just established some basic stuff and props, looking for your code. And this again is just so I can have some control over the styling and ensuring that I don't have to talk, reference Houston on every time that I use the code. I think it just makes sense for usability. But again, your footer Astro, this looks familiar. Let's talk about Astro components quickly while we have this open, though. This is called front matter. You might see this if you've used like MD or MDX files as well. Um, this lets you basically use JavaScript in the component file. And what's really cool with Astro is you can then underneath your component, you can put a style tag in here. And these styles that you put are scoped only to the component. And you could use this locally scoped styling on components, on pages, whatever. And this I think is really, really powerful. It allows you to have that just even more control over everything that you're creating and building. And it's one of my favorite parts because let's say by default, I want to have unordered lists with the left margin and to show the list decimal. So that way it's, you have you have the dot rather, the disk for those list items. But in my nav, I don't want that. Well, in your nav, you can go ahead and say UL text decoration none. And that way, none of those list items have that. The scope styling, I think, is really, really powerful. It's one of my favorite things, like I mentioned. Again, no, I didn't really have a need for it in this project, but on my current portfolio, I definitely did. Um, this power, actually, I'll show you a better example of the front matter here. If we go back to, let's see, one of these I think has something. You can just see more props here. Again, a link component is just an anchor tag. I established my styles and then put a slot here for whatever text actually shows. So this is the style tag where I was showing. Um, because I'm using my link component everywhere, I could say where this is a link component, but where it is in a nav, UL, LI, and anchor tag, or where it's a footer and anchor, I do not want an underline, and I want the hover effect to be text foreground. I'll open up the browser here because that sounds like a lot of gibberish. Basically, all it's saying that is that, hey, where this is a link inside of a nav, I want no underline, and I want to hover it and have it be the text foreground CSS variable. If I go to a link that I have here in my body, I know I have one. Here you go. Integration of your choice. Notice it's got the underline. It's a small thing, but it just allows you to use less. It allows you to repeat yourself less. And that's, I think, something that we all strive to do wherever it makes sense. All right, sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat from this dot. Yeah, sorry, I should have declared before I was using Tailwind. All right, cool. Let's clean up my code editor a little bit, and let's just show you a couple more things. What's really nice with React is their layouts. Again, it's not unique to Astro, but I really like how they do it. So here we have my base layout with Astro, and again we have your front matter. So I'm importing the CSS. I'm importing whatever components I want to use, and this client router slide and Astro transitions. What the hell is that? Astro has native support for view transitions. So that's how, with one simple line of code, I can get those slide in and out effects, which I think is sick. And it'll know which direction you're coming from. For example, if I go back, notice how it slides in the opposite way. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Um, really, really simple again. As long as everything's using the same layout, you can go ahead and enable that. So inside my base layout, I have a head component. This client router is required for the transitions, the view transitions. And then here again, if you've ever used layouts in any other framework, you're probably familiar with this. But I've got my body. Inside of that is a div where I have my max screen width. And then I could go ahead and put my nav bar, my footer, and the slot. The slot is where the rest of your content is going. Layouts are used a little bit differently in Astro than they are, for example, Next.js. Next.js, they will be used basically in like a routing fashion. So you have your layout, and then unless you dictate another layout, it'll continue to use those for all the subdirectories. For Astro, it's a little bit different. I'll go to my index page. So we import the base layout here, and then we actually use it to wrap the entire everything else that you're putting here. And you can see here, this is powerful for a couple of reasons. Number one, I like it personally. I think it like this is an opinionated thing, but I just think it helps remind you where you're getting that layout and it helps clean up the code and remind you, oh yeah, this is a child of that layout. Secondly, you can pass props to it.
Hey,
So go ahead.
what you doing?
Um, so the title is a prop that I have equals to why not Astro. And then I have here page title is equal to title, and then a description. So you could use this wherever you want. But you'll see that Astro is a static site builder that's built blah, blah, blah. It's the description I'm using right here. This is why I like it a lot. And note that I'm using this actually in an H group component. This is just a component. Actually, you can see there. The H group component represents a heading and related content. It groups a single H1 through H6 elements with one or more P. This is something relatively new I found out about. I said, why am I not using this? It just makes sense. Let's go ahead and open up this H group component. Again, it's an Astro component, very simple, straightforward. But you have those props that I'm passing in, and you're declaring them in the front matter between these three hyphens. And you can see here again, this is just basic components and stuff, but I just want to show you how the props are feeding into it. Let's go talk about the blog real quick. So inside my blog, I have the index and I have the slug. So for example, the index here is going to be the blog page. And you can see here, I've got the H group and I've got the H group. And where is this information coming from? Just to reiterate, it's coming from this right up here. So as we talked about before, Astro's Content Layer API is a powerful tool for building content-heavy static sites that allow you to manage your content from many different sources easily. We talked about before how you can pull in information with an API from your newsletter or maybe your YouTube channel, and then you have your CMS for your blogs. Whatever you're doing, you could do it all here. And then if we come down here, we have const posts equals await. Everything in here, actually, this is an important note. Everything in your front matter is wrapped in an async function. So you can just go ahead and await your collection of blog. And then here I want to sort those blogs by the publish date. And then we come down here and below the heading and stuff, I'm just mapping over those posts, importing it from Astro content of the content entry, the collection entry of blog. And then obviously you're just telling it how to style those things. Let's go ahead and dive into one of those blogs. Getting started with Astro. Why not? This is a markdown file. This is a markdown file that I'll open up for you right here. That also has front matter. This is where we're telling it our data, our title, our description, publish date, all that jazz, including the featured image, which I could choose to use elsewhere, but I'm not. I'm choosing just to use in the block here. But again, this is just a markdown file. If you can write markdown, you could write a blog on Astro. It's really that easy. It supports syntax highlighting out of the box. Again, that's built with Shiki. All you have to do is establish a preferred theme in your Astro config. By default, I think it uses GitHub Dark. But in this case, I'm using the Houston theme for the syntax highlighting. So again, on the right, we're going to just look at that. So inside our source folder, we have our content. And this is where all of your content's going to live. If I had a newsletter here, I would have a separate directory for newsletter. For right now, we just have the blog. But you can see I have 3 different posts, and that's where it's getting this data from. The config.ts, however, This is where you define your content collection. Again, if you had a newsletter, if you had other things, this is where you could define those. And all you're doing here is showing, and this is using Zod, like I said, as well as TypeScript. Um, but we have our schema and with the title, description, and date. And if I just put this side by side with the blog post, come on, there we go. You'll see the schema, title, description, pub date equals exactly what's up here in the front matter in the blog. So you're ensuring that that information matches across the board. Obviously, it's type safe and all that jazz. Really helps you, I think, just avoid errors and stuff. That's why we like TypeScript so much. Okay, hope you're still with me. I know I'm going a little bit fast, going from object to object. Um, that's our blog and content. The other thing I wanted to touch on quickly was the TS config, and then we're going to touch on the Astro config. You could close. Okay. So the TS config, the great thing about installing integrations and the Astro CLI is it will create this for you, which is awesome. However, like I discussed before, using multiple JSX frameworks does give you a little bit of a hard time, and you can see these overrides that I have here starting on line 10. Basically, we're just telling this, hey, we want to override these files found in the solid component directory, which is why I mentioned it's so important you do this if you're using multiple frameworks, especially the JSX ones. You want your compiler to tell it where to import those from. So we have one for solid, note this is the solid directory, and we're importing the JSX from solid.js. We have one for Preact and it's importing the JSX from Preact, excuse me, and so forth with React. I add the other ones just to be safe. I don't think these ones are actually necessary, but it is especially necessary if you're using React or any combination of these three: React, Preact, and Solid.js. In the Astro config, we have another important thing to talk about is the integrations. So anything you install, note I have Tailwind in here, and then I have all of our frameworks. This is where you need to tell it what to include. This is, again, just going to help you avoid the issue I had last night where my solid.js, the counter just wasn't working. And why wasn't it working? Because my directory was named solid.js, and yet I was telling the Astro config to look for solid. It was that easy of a solution. I tell you, it took me way too much time to figure that out. And I actually reached out to Dev. He's working at Solid.js. I said, hey, do you have a second to look over the Solid.js component? Like, why isn't this working? He goes, it should be. And that's the worst answer you have, right? Because it should be working doesn't mean it is. Of course, once I figured it out with help of the Astro Discord, there it was. Because all I did was look at their Astro config. I looked at mine again and said, wait a minute, something's not right. And again, very frustrating, but it happens, right? So again, this is something I have to do. I will have this in the repo, and I'm going to be writing up a blog on it as well because it's something that I don't think is that commonly covered, and I just want to make sure that no one else runs into it as well. Further up in the Astro config, we could see the markdown syntax highlighting is Shiki. Again, it could be Prism if you prefer. And then in my Shiki config, I'm saying the theme is Houston and the wrap is true. I want it to wrap. I'm going to open up real quick my code custom component because this is a little thing that you have to take into account as well. The code component does not take into account what you have in your Astro config, which is why here I am telling it to use the theme Houston again. This is something that I thought I should, but obviously because this is for Markdown and not, your code component, it's another story. So just keep in mind that if you're not seeing the same theme across both of them, you have to make sure that you specify in your code component as well as for your Markdown. But as you can see here, this is one blog post. If I go back, we can see another blog post where we have Houston. And this is a literal interpretation of Astro Islands. There's no code in here, but I just thought that was pretty funny. But if we go back to the homepage, again, we have that same Astro theme. So just something important to note, and I'm looking forward to just writing more about it so that others can learn from it and don't make the same mistakes that I did. If you're working with Astro, there's really only one extension you definitely need, and that is going to be the Astro extension. It is by astro.build. It adds language support in your IDE for it. I'm using Cursor, which is a fork of VS Code. It's definitely obviously available for VS Code in that case. And then things that, I had to download was like Markdown support for Vue because I hadn't used Vue or Svelte before. So I'm sure you'll know that though if you're used to working those frameworks. So I think that's just about everything I have for you. I just want to double check that there's anything else. Oh, yes, one more thing. Okay. I'm glad I looked. So we have our source folder and we have our public folder. And so that public folder is anything that you do not want Astro to touch. So for example, my fonts, my OG image, I don't want Astro to worry about this whatsoever. Just don't touch it and just use it as is. So that's where anything in your public folder will go. I don't have the the OG image working just yet. I'll fix it later today. Inside my assets, this is where you want to store your photos that you want to use Astro's image component for. This is what will allow it to optimize that image for load times and such. It'll compress it and stuff, just like the Next.js image component if you've used that before. As of Astro 5.0, excuse me, they are working on some experimental features, allowing it to sort of have responsive images, and it'll intelligently crop the image based on the screen size and stuff. Those are all experimental flags you can enable via your Astro config. Um, Something that I didn't mess with yet, but if they're working on it, it's going to be coming in an Astro update eventually. Just food for thought there. And I think, Danny, that's everything I've got with surrounding Astro.
I will tell you, whether you realize this or not, the joke that you made was a hit. So kudos to you there. I'm
Good,
very
good.
big. Look, I'm the type of person that if we're on a team meeting and everybody is muted, I will unmute just to laugh. But I didn't want to do that during the presentation, so I had to make sure you knew that.
I
We
appreciate
had
it.
we had a couple questions here. Maybe you can direct them to a resource or something that could possibly be a potential answer. But Simone here asked a good question that I think will be valuable for people. I'm not sure when to ask this, but I'll write it here. I love Astro's idea, but I found it complicated to implement things like global state for something as simple as a sidebar toggle. This can be toggled on different parts of the website. For example, different React components on min of the header, one for content. What do you use for these kinds of needs, or what suggestions do you have?
Yeah. So in the this dot chat, Chris did beat to the punch, but Astro does recommending using nano stores for that. It's really just here. I'll actually pull it up on their website for you. Uh, it's a way of managing state, but obviously everything they want to do is sort of minimize more. So nano stores allow you to basically store state between islands. And again, they like it because it's lightweight and it's framework agnostic, which means you can use it amongst everything. This is really how I would do it. And I'll just share this real quick in Simone's thing. Actually, Chris did, I think, already as well. This is where I would go. I actually meant to mess with it, but I ran out of time for the website. But I'll be updating it as well, so I can also throw some resources to that once it's done later this weekend. But nano stores is your answer.
Perfect. The YouTube chat has been on fire, so kudos to you there. A lot of people are here hanging out, showing you support. So make sure you check out that chat after the fact.
Love that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that. I think the workshop went really, really well. So thank you for even taking the time to kind of hang out with us and give back to the community and share some of this with everybody.
You have
I
to.
guess one last call to action, for those that are watching the stream, or if you're watching the stream after the fact, make sure that you're following Ryan everywhere. Amazing member of the community. He's giving back. If I think he's gonna have some big news over the next couple of days to share. If you're not following him, highly recommend checking that out. Outside of that, Ryan, any last call to actions, anything you want to share, or any last things that you want to I guess, mention to the community overall?
Thanks, Danny. I just want to say thank you to this dot and thank you to Tracy Lee for telling me to do this. Again, it all came up because I was wearing the Astro hat and someone that we were eating dinner breakfast next to asks about Astro, and Tracy goes, "When are you going to give a talk on this?" And that's just how it happened. So hopefully this year, waiting on a CFP answer. But really, the other things I've got going on besides the news that I'll drop in a couple days is my podcast, Web Dev Dialogues. I'm releasing a few new episodes this weekend, as well as starting season 2 next week with Nick Taylor. So that's exciting. And you can find me everywhere at Ryan DOT Furr. That's Ryan.Furr. Everywhere but LinkedIn. LinkedIn is just Ryan Furr, Furrer. That's everything I got. I appreciate it, Danny.
All right, y'all. That's going to be a wrap on this JS drop. If you found any value in this whatsoever, please drop a like on the video or share it with others that can also benefit from it and see what Ryan can do. Outside